So there's two parts to it. The first part is that, you can just be yourself and say no and not be worried about that person not being your friend anymore. Like as childlike as it sounds, I have young children, so we have this whole drama. I'm like, oh my goodness, was I like this as a child? Sorry, Mum. Maybe even for many of us leading into the perfectionism. Like if you have a plan to do something and it's not going exactly according to the plan in your head, it's like, oh, I just won't do it at all. And sometimes, I know I can do this. It's like, I've got a blog to write or I've got my own podcast to record. Yeah, I don't feel like it today. I'll go check my email because then I'm responding to other people's inquiries or other people's things rather than my own. Or I'll go and, have something from the fridge or, go and distract ourselves with something. So as soon as I find myself going to, find somebody to rescue or find somebody who needs me, now I'm like, ooh, what am I avoiding or what am I not doing? So there's two parts to saying no. They're saying no to others for their requests and trusting that they have the resources to ask someone else or get their needs met elsewhere. But there's also saying no to ourselves when we're like getting stuck in the perfectionistic cycle or it's not enough or it's not good enough or I need to redo. And just trust that, your best gets to get better. Self-care isn't selfish and like we're human beings, not human doings. So if you have that time just for you and you allow yourself to enjoy it, you start to, the feelings of guilt will lessen over time. But in the beginning, because you've always done it this way, it will take time to change.
On this episode of Calmly Coping, we have international mindset coach, speaker, and author Suzanne Culberg. She helps overgivers and people pleasers learn to set boundaries and say no to others in a way that feels good so they can say yes to themselves. In this conversation, Suzanne shares why boundaries are crucial for managing anxiety, how to establish them without feeling selfish, and why worrying about others' opinions can hold us back. Get ready for an empowering and insightful discussion with Suzanne Culberg. Hey, Tati here, and welcome to Calmly Coping. I am here with Suzanne Culberg. She is an author and coach, and she specializes in helping people who struggle with people pleasing and overgiving. So I know that is something that you listeners definitely struggle with. So I'm excited to get into this conversation. It's great to have you here, Suzanne.
Thank you so much for having me.
So can you let us know more about, first, what is a people pleaser?
So a lot of people don't actually identify with the people pleaser tag. They're like, I'm just generous or something like that. There is, for me, the boundary is a person who is generous, as cliche as it sounds, gives from the overflow or already has a full cup or is unattached to the response for their giving. So if I was like, hey, this is an awesome resource, or I've made this great video, or I recommend you see this person, and then go about your merry way, and that's the end of it. But when it leans into people pleasing or overgiving or, too much energy, is when it takes away from what you had planned to do. So if you're not a people pleaser and someone says, hey, can you just do this? And you're like, oh, not today, or no thanks, or whatever, that's the end. But people pleasers really struggle to say no. It's kind of like, there's this ad here in Australia at the moment, and there's this girl and she's got this new phone and everyone keeps saying, can you send me that? She's like, sure. Can you send me that? Sure. My kids love it. They're like, oh my goodness, it's such a people pleaser ad, because she's just like become the unofficial photographer for everything. And it's used to sell the product. And I'm just like, no, get your own phone. So it's kind of like, when I think sometimes people are afraid to step into the people pleaser label or claim people pleaser tendencies because they don't want to be seen as rude or not accommodating or whatever. But if it's actually taking away from what you had planned to do or gets in the way of you following your own goals, then that's when it becomes people pleasing. Because if you're afraid to say no and are worried that that's going to cost you a friendship or a relationship, that isn't a healthy connection to have.
Yeah, that's a great point. So it sounds like it's that fear of saying no, and you mentioned it kind of takes people away from what they had already planned. So I'm hearing also that, like, when you're not people pleasing, there's that letting go of the outcome. And like, so you don't feel as though the relationship or however person might respond is dependent on what you're saying.
Exactly. So there's two parts to it. The first part is that you can just be yourself and say no and not be worried about that person not being your friend anymore. Like as childlike as it sounds, I have young children, so we have this whole drama. I'm like, oh my goodness, was I like this as a child? Sorry, mum. There's that, but also too, you can do the things that you want to do. Like so many of my clients, so I know what to do, but I just don't do it. And the reason they don't do it, whether it be they're trying to release weight or save money or become an entrepreneur or write a book or whatever it is because they're all up in everyone else's business. And, we can kind of downplay what we're doing. Oh, I'll do it tomorrow, or I'll start Monday, the universal day to change your life. And then Monday comes and it's like, oh, next Monday. And we're always putting it off until later rather than, making the time for ourselves today.
So why do you think it's so hard for people to make time for themselves and to say no to other people?
I think it's conditioning that, when you think about historically when we lived in tribes, if you were kicked out of the tribe, then that was it. You didn't have anything because we lived that way. And now in modern society, we move around a lot. We often live away from our families. We restart over and over and over again. We live in a different way than we used to. And I think there's a two-part to it. One is, the conditioning. And the second part is maybe even for many of us leading into the perfectionism. Like if you have a plan to do something and it's not going exactly according to the plan in your head, it's like, oh, I just won't do it at all. And sometimes, I know I can do this. It's like I've got a blog to write or I've got my own podcast to record. Yeah, I don't feel like it today. I'll go check my email because then I'm responding to other people's inquiries or other people's things rather than my own. Or I'll go and, have something from the fridge or, go and distract ourselves with something. So as soon as I find myself going to, find somebody to rescue or find somebody who needs me, now I'm like, ooh, what am I avoiding or what am I not doing, rather than taking it as a bad sign or you're getting all upset about it. It's like, oh, this is curious. There's something about this. Like I've made the task too big or I've put too much pressure on it, especially in business, those of us in business. No one post, no one email is going to make or break your business. And sometimes we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves. And we can use, people pleasing inadvertently, like unconsciously as an out, because it's like, oh, I'll go check my email or my DMs or something. And then at the end of the day, it's like, oh, I never have any time to write my blogs or do my thing because I get so many messages. And it's like, no, because I don't manage my time effectively.
Interesting. So what you're describing, I think, is something that I can certainly relate to. I think a lot of people where it's like the desire to make or do the perfect thing. And then because that seems so daunting and overwhelming, then it's easier to just address, okay, how can I respond to this person and give more because that feels like it's easier.
Yeah, and I believe it becomes like a cycle. So at the beginning of the cycle, we make plans. So that could be if you're trying to drop weight, a meal plan. If you're trying to get fitter, an exercise plan. If you're trying to run a business, a business plan. We make the plan. And then someone's like, could you just pick up my script? Could you just watch me do a cartwheel? That's my daughter at the moment. Could you just, help me with this? Could you stay for 5 minutes? And we all know 5 minutes really means like 2 hours. And so we say, sure, like the ad. And then whether or not we're conscious of it, we can become a little bit resentful because this keeps happening. And we start to burn out when we do this repeatedly. And then because we've overgiven, we end up over-consuming in some way. Like, I believe giving and receiving is like inhaling and exhaling. You can't have one without the other. So when you overgive, like you give too much help to others, you tend up over-consuming in some way. Now, I'm a classic foodie, so for me, it's, Netflix and chips or chocolate or ice cream. But it could be over shopping, it could be overworking, it could be over exercising, drinking, something that we do. Like a lot of people say, I stay up late and I eat, or I stay up late and I drink, or I stay up late and I shop, and then, Amazon Prime is my best friend. I wake up the next day and I was like, oh, wow, what's all this? And then we feel guilty because we have overspent, overeaten, overdrunk, or whatever. So then we end up making plans again, which is back at the beginning. So we're convinced that we need to fix this nighttime issue. We need to find the right program, the right coach, the right, resource, when really the intervention point is actually saying no and working through. So there's two parts to saying no. They're saying no to others for their requests and trusting that they have the resources to ask someone else or get their needs met elsewhere. But there's also saying no to ourselves when we're like getting stuck in the perfectionistic cycle, or it's not enough, or it's not good enough, or I need to redo, and just trust that, your best gets to get better. It's funny, somewhere along the line we lose that. Like we look at like young children, we don't expect them to walk on the first go. They fall, they step, they pull themselves up, they fall, they step, they fall. Or my son, my daughter got it quite fast. My son's really struggling to learn to write. I've had pencil positioners and hours of letters, and he reverses everything. But on the whole, I'm not concerned that he's never going to write. It's going to take a little longer, but he's going to get there. But us as adults, we have this idea, I want to do this thing, and then we're not great at it instantly. So, are you willing to suck at it enough to get good? Or are you looking for an out, to give yourself an out? And sometimes overgiving, people pleasing is one of those outs.
Yeah, I love that cycle that you described. And it made me think of this phrase I've heard before that I've noticed in a lot of my clients and students, called revenge bedtime procrastination. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of that, but where like
No,
people
I'm going to need to write that down.
they stay up late, whether it's like watching TV or doing something that they enjoy, because they feel like they need that time for themselves, because they haven't had it earlier in the day because they were giving so much to others, whether it was work or requests. So that's what it reminded me of when you were describing that.
It totally is. And the thing is, I think because so many of us feel really guilty to take time for ourselves during the day. However, if we eat, girl gotta eat. So it's kind of like we pair the eating with the activity because it's more socially acceptable. Whereas if you're like, actually, I want to have a nap. That's audacious. Or I want to just go outside and sit in the sun, or read a book, or go for a walk, or do something. Because when there's this book, I think Amanda Owen, Born to Receive, and she speaks about activities and receptivities. So things that we do during a day, activities, and most people would only associate them with work or whatever. But there's also getting the kids ready for school if you have them, helping with the homework, meal prep, shopping, cleaning, like all these times that we're on. And then there's receptivities, which is like when we recharge, and different people do it in different ways. Like a lot of my clients like gardening. That's not my thing. I've got like a black thumb. I like reading. But sometimes the receptivities can become too much. Like even you can watch an episode of Netflix and go, that was great. Or you can binge an entire season and then have little regard for what you have on tomorrow. So often I think we don't allow ourselves the receptivities during the day because I've got things to do and that's not productive. So in the evening, it ends up that we overdo those things and then it has the knock-on effect for the next day. Like if you stay up really late watching TV or reading a good book and then the next morning you're not functioning, it tends to set you up to fail in the long term in that regard too. So it's like, but if I allowed myself to do this during the day, I wouldn't need to stay up so late because I wouldn't feel so overdone.
Mm-hmm. And what do you think is that line between wanting to be helpful and then people pleasing? And I think I read something that you had mentioned, like the line between just helping and enabling.
So the first thing is, does the person even want your help? Like sometimes we are well-meaning And then we don't understand why they aren't listening or why they aren't doing what we suggested, or we get more invested in the person than they are in themselves. So, are they actually wanting help? And then sometimes when it becomes enabling, I used this example recently. It's a very personal example. So myself and my daughter, we both have anxiety, and my daughter often likes to talk it out, and it's very helpful for her. However, she usually comes in about 10 o'clock at night. So just as I'm winding down and getting ready for bed, she's ready to open up. And then I will listen. And then once I've helped her calm down and everything, get her off to bed, I can't go to bed straight away. I need to then unwind, decompress. So I found I was staying up to like 1 or 2 a.m. And then I have a son who gets up really early. So this combination was not working. And I wasn't actually helping her. I was enabling her to stay up late and to not take care of herself and prioritize, because she's 9. She needs to be in bed a lot earlier than that. So I remember having the conversation, I love you fiercely. And when you start having a boundary conversation, like, depending on the person, you might not say that to a friend. I appreciate you. I value our friendship, whatever it is. This is what's been happening up until now. So you're not blaming. You're not you always, this can't continue, or from now on, or however. So basically, I was like, I love you fiercely. You're coming to me late at night, and this isn't working for me. I need to talk about this earlier with you so that we can, all go to bed and keep our routine. I can't remember. It's a long story, but basically, she was like, okay. And sometimes when we set a boundary, we're like, and then the person doesn't uphold it, and we're like, excuse me, did you just not hear this conversation? So you need to kind of reinforce it. So over a few days, what happened was, like, for me, I wanted to talk to her just after school. But then again, there's another thing with the boundary. Does it work for them? So what we identified is just after school doesn't work for her. She needs some time to unwind, be away from the situation, kind of get her stuff together. So late at night didn't work for me. After school didn't work for her. So the middle ground, like coming up with these windows, which was either just before I make dinner, so there's a few, like an hour or two after school, or just after dinner, there are the times that I'm available for us to have this discussion. I'm open to it. I'm happy to help, but this is where it has to be. And I remember the first time that she didn't do it, and she came back at 10, and I had to say no, because me stopping to help her there is enabling this to continue, is enabling her not to prioritize herself, was really, really difficult. And this is the thing, you get to tweak and you get to learn. So what I learned from that was, maybe she needs me to check in. So now what I do is, just before I go to make dinner, I say, is there anything that you want to discuss? Is there anything that's happened that we need to process? And no, I'm fine, mummy. And then, like, just after dinner, I check in again, and then I say, and just a reminder, this is the last opportunity for today. So I think sometimes we are worried that we are going to upset the person, or especially with our children, I'm going to stuff them up for life and they're going to need therapy. Like, they're probably going to need therapy for whatever, like, because that's the thing. But us over helping or overextending ourselves for someone else is enabling them to not prioritize themselves. And also, when it becomes detrimental to us, that really needs to be a boundary there. Or if somebody is capable, like my son, he has autism, so he has some learning difficulties, and there's things that I just do for him that I'm like, he's going to have to learn this eventually. So right now we're learning to tie a shoe. It's a process. He still has the Velcro shoes in the meantime, but it's like, no, I'm not going to continue to just do this for you. I'll be patient. I'll be calm. You can wear the Velcro shoes until you have this figured out. But if I'm just going to continue, if you have that friend that you're always the one who, does the groceries for them or organizes the catch up, or, they're capable of something, but they're just like, Suzanne will do it. We've all been there. Then over time, what are you actually holding them back from being able to do it themselves? Because you're not always going to be there. My son's not always going to be there to have me tie his shoe. And my daughter's not always going to be there when she needs someone to help calm down. So I need to trust that I'm helping instill them to be able to cope with these on their own.
Yeah, I love those personal stories that you shared. And, I think that can be so true, especially with children, with family members, that you want to be there to support them. But then at a certain point, you're preventing them from learning those tools and those skills on their own. Um, I think for a lot of people in that moment when they're setting a boundary, there can be a lot of guilt that comes up. So what would you suggest if somebody is just like feeling really guilty, or they're feeling bad, or
What
worried
comes to
about how the
mind for
person might
me
react?
is when you go to a gym, like to work out, and you see this large rack of dumbbells,
Mhm.
you don't go up to the heaviest one and start trying to curl those. Like, chances are you wouldn't even be able to lift that off the rack. So if you've never set a boundary before, and you read a book on boundaries, or you listen to a podcast about boundaries, and you're like, okay, I got this. It's like you're walking into the gym and going straight to the end. Like, if you've never set a boundary before, I wouldn't recommend setting one with a child, family member, somebody really close. Like that boundary example I just gave my daughter, I'd be working my way up to that one. I'd be picking something. The easiest boundaries I found to set, especially because I was a premier people pleaser. What do they say? You teach what you most need to know so you can learn it. Think of a situation where you're almost embarrassed about the fact that you say yes and you wouldn't share it publicly. So for me, I was always the sucker for the upsell. Like, if you go anywhere, would you like fries with that? Oh, that dress is great. Here's some shoes. Like, or would you like a bag? Would you like to buy a bag? Even though I've got Enviro bags in my hand. What are you asking me for? Oh, sure. So pick a situation where you nominally would say yes and start it out there, and then learn to adjust like your nervous system and celebrate when you're like, oh my, I did it. Like, you're at the petrol station and you've put fuel in your car. Do you want a candy? No, thank you. Or start in little ways, like do your reps. And the other thing with that too, when you start setting boundaries with people who are either not commonly in your life or just coming into your life, they don't know another version of you. So when you start to do it with family, especially your children or close people in your household, it's often the hardest because, oh, mum always does that. Mum always ties my shoes. Mum always stays up. Mum's always there. So that can take some time to remind, and also negotiate. Because as I said, for me, because a boundary isn't about, I think sometimes people think it's about them getting their way or they're being demanding. And it's like, well, ideally for me, after school, as I said, would have worked. But then if this was over a number of weeks, it's like after school didn't work for her. She needs some time to decompress. And then, like, I didn't realize I needed to kind of remind her. So, when we have really young children, before you leave the house, you need to go to the toilet? Are you sure? Because as soon as you get in the car, I need to pee. So it's just kind of like realizing it's not going to be a once and done. The first few dozen times, you will notice that guilt. But then once you've done it, notice what's the opposite of guilt. I don't know, euphoria, the relief. As you've done it, it's like, oh, I get to go to bed at 10, or oh, I don't have to, do this thing. I don't have to always be the one. Like, enjoy that feeling of spaciousness, and don't immediately fill it with helping somebody else with something, because it's something I've done before. I freed up this. Like, how many of us, we have an overpacked schedule, so we drop something and we don't even allow that euphoric moment before we pick up something else. So it's kind of like, allow that space, allow that receptivity, and notice what's on the other side of guilt. And, because self-care isn't selfish, and like, we're human beings, not human doings. So if you have that time just for you and you allow yourself to enjoy it, you start to, the feelings of guilt will lessen over time. But in the beginning, because you've always done it this way, it will take time to change.
Yeah, I think that's so important that, especially when you're changing a boundary, and setting one with somebody that they're used to you doing things a certain way, there can be more of that friction. So I like those small examples that you gave to get started. And you mentioned that, you used to struggle with people pleasing. So can you share more about like what got you into this work?
Oh, there's so many examples I can think of people pleasing. I was always that friend. You're the one who instigates the catch ups or organizes the events, or feels like it always falls to you. And then when you don't have boundaries at all, often what can happen is you can pendulum swing over to the other side, and we're not set in a healthy way, kind of be like, well, I'm just not going to bother. I'm not going to reach out to them at all, and kind of sit there seeding in your resentment, waiting for people to reach out. And when they do, oh, so nice to hear from you and whatever. It's like, when you think about that, would you like to ring someone who, when you do contact them, kind of almost bites your head off? So yeah, I didn't do it in a healthy way a lot of the time. A lot of the fears, because like, what do we fear when we say no? That we'll burn the bridge or we'll lose the relationship or whatever. And it's like, yeah, if you're weird about it, it's the same as like in a workplace situation. Can you just do this activity or take you 5 minutes? And it actually takes you 2 hours. I can think of an example of something. I was given this task always, like I finished work at 5, was always given it about 4:30, so that I'd have to stay back. Now, if someone did it, say you gave me something, I'd be like, oh, the next day, Tatty, you gave me the activity, it's done. It didn't actually take 5 minutes. It took 2 hours. So it's done. There's no need to worry. But next time, if you need me to do an activity, I'm going to need it by 2 so I can still finish on time. Or, having some sort of discussion. Like, that scares so many of us. We're like, oh, I could never do that. So what we just do is sure. And then get to the point where we blow up. You don't appreciate me. You always expect me to stay back. And you're probably thinking, Suze doesn't mind. She's never said anything. She just stays back. And this is where an unhealthy dynamic can happen. And since the pandemic, my husband's been working from home. And I can think of such a great example. I can only hear one side of the conversation. I'm not meaning to listen in, but, small house, pandemic, everyone's around. I hear him on the phone and he's like, okay, cool. So which one's the priority one? Can't hear what they're saying. And he's like, you're not understanding me. There can only be one priority one. More stuff happening. He's like, I can do one thing at a time. So of these, which one would you like? More discussion. And he's like, look, if you're not going to make a decision, I'll just pick the one that's the most fun for me. And listening to that, it was like, it was not rude. It was not inflammatory. It was just argumentative. It was literally, if you give me 10 things, they're all priority one, and there's one of me, I can only do one. And I think so often what I used to do is I'd just stay back late and do them all, or I would do them all kind of sloppy, or I can even think of examples back at school where group projects and other people wouldn't pull their weight, so I'd just do the whole thing, and then everybody get the good grade, and I'd be really unhappy with it. And I remember at university that this was one of the turning of the tides for me becoming a people pleaser. I was in this group. It was worth a large part of our grade, and I was done. And I said we had 4 people in our group, and one of them didn't even turn up, didn't even show up to anything. So spoke to him. He just kind of disregarded me. Whatever. So I remember going to lecturers. I'm like, no, this will not stand. I'm not doing this. And we had this thing, and he was given a portion of the project, and then we had to do a presentation. And we said, look, if you don't do this, So we negotiated with the lecturers. He ended up getting a different grade. 3 of us got 85% and he got 18. So failed the class. And I remember the kickback from that and how unhappy he was. And I was like, I think the difference between being mean and having boundaries is he was told along the way, this is what you need to do. This is when you need to turn up. Are there different... Like, he was in the picture and he chose to ignore that. So, enabling would have been, let's just carry the line and he can get our grade. And being mean would have been, let's just go and see the lecturer behind his back and not say anything and whatever. So sometimes people, they're informed all along the way and they choose to ignore that. And then they make what's happened the consequence your problem. That is a whole different situation than you saying, actually, this is what I'm available for and this is what I'm unavailable for. And doing your work for you, staying back past work closing, taking on many priority ones because you have too much. I'm not available for that.
Yeah, so it sounds like it's about being clear and communicating on your end, because other people can't read your mind and maybe they don't understand or know that, okay, this is too much for one person to take on, rather than kind of suffering in silence, and then that behavior is going to continue.
Yeah, I heard a phrase recently which I love. Another name for people pleasers is the exploding doormat. So I'd heard the doormat and I really identified with that, but the exploding part, it's where you kind of say yes, and then you lose it. You never appreciate me. You don't value my time. You don't. And the other person is often like, whoa, because we'd never said anything, but we don't want to say anything along the way because we don't want to be mean or we don't want to be rude. But, often if someone says, hey, can you do this? It'll take 5 minutes. And you're like, actually, it took 2 hours. And then you have this conversation. Maybe there was a more efficient way to do it, which you weren't aware of. And then you have this conversation. They're like, oh, so what did you do? And you're like, I did this and this. Oh, actually, do you know you could do it like this? It's like when you move to a new suburb. We moved here a few years ago. And the path I took the kids to school, it took 40 minutes to walk. We weren't familiar with the suburb. We'd only just moved here. And then I saw these people, 6 months after we moved here in uniform, going the other way. I was like, how are they getting to school? And I was like, let's just follow them in a non-creepy way. And there was this shortcut. I cut it in half. So, sometimes when we're all frustrated at how long this takes and the other person not appreciating us, there could be another way to do it. And they're thinking you're doing it their way. They're thinking, why does it take her so long to walk to school? Like, seriously, we leave at the same time. So opening up that line of communication and, or maybe it does take 2 hours and they didn't realize that, or they just thought you didn't mind. Because I can think of so many examples of clients I've worked with who say their parents live nearby and they ask them to babysit and the parents are like, sure. And then the parents, after a time, it's like, you always ask me to babysit, and they get frustrated. They would have been quite happy to hire a babysitter, but they thought, like, oh, you love spending time with the grandkids. And it's not saying, that's the other thing too. I think sometimes when we set a boundary, we say no. I'm not saying I don't love you, I don't love spending time with you, but maybe not every week, or maybe this weekend I have something else. So I think it's differentiating saying no from this occasion to giving a label to what you think or feel about the person. Like, I love my children fiercely all the time. Don't always like them. I'm an introvert. Sometimes I just need to be alone. And I think, some people don't get that. They're like, oh, you want go and have a night away on your own. That's indulgent. And I'm like, no, for me, it's required sometimes, not all the time. So I think as differentiating that saying no to a event or a thing versus that having a label on your relationship or how you relate to that person.
Yeah, I think that's a great distinction. And I think that sometimes people on the receiving end can take it personally, especially if it's a close relationship. I think they can take it like, oh, you don't want to spend time with me, or, you don't listen to me, or you're not available for me, or whatever it might be. So how would you suggest somebody responds if they are setting a boundary and there's somebody in the relationship that they are maybe not understanding it or taking it personally?
It's a great question to ask for more information when they say that they're making it. What makes you think that, or that's not gaslighting. Like, sometimes we're like, oh, I don't want to gaslight them. But say, for example, when you have a clear communication. So I am an introvert, like on the scale of introvertness, cannot get much past this end. So now all of my friends know that. And so if we're going to go to a movie or something, like, Suzanne, would you like to do this activity? I would say, first thing, instead of just saying yes, let me check my schedule. Because if I say yes in the moment, when I'm in someone's energy, sometimes I'll say yes just because they want to do the thing. And I'm like, actually, I don't want to do the thing. So giving yourself that space and then saying, like, I would like to, not sure, I've got quite a busy week on. So, like, it's not that you don't commit. It's just that you kind of know, hey, I'm trying to think of how to explain this. It also depends on the event. Like, if somebody invites me to their wedding or their graduation or something that's really important for them, it doesn't matter how tired or introverted or flat I feel, I will go. But if it's like a movie or a coffee catch up or something, becoming a place where you're like, I know we were going to catch up today. I haven't had any sleep, or something about the honesty, because what we tend to do is we fake it and pretend that we're sick, or pretend that we've had a car breakdown or something, or say yes when we had no intention of going, and then on the day make up some lame excuse. I think that's a lot more detrimental than just being really honest. I'm having an introvert day, I need to recharge. Can we catch up next time? Because also too, if I go when I'm like that, it's not a great connection. I'm not really there. I'm not really present. Or it's like, is it something that you both wanted to do? Like sometimes people say, would you come and see this movie? And you're like, oh, I'm not really interested in that movie. So we say yes and we go along trying to placate or whatever. I've had this happen before. It's like, and then, 6 months into the friendship, they find out you don't actually like that genre. It's like, why didn't you tell me back at the beginning? So it's like, would you like to go and see this movie? Thanks for inviting me. I don't really like horror, or I don't really like sci-fi or whatever. Is there anything else showing? So sometimes the no isn't a firm no. It's a negotiation to what else is there. Because the other thing too, if you have like a Tupperware party, hey Suzanne, do you want to come to my Tupperware party? I can't stand Tupperware. And I'm like, oh, I'm busy, invite me next time. So you have another one. Oh, I'm busy, invite me next time. This is where it gets awkward because you're like, I'm always asking her. She's always saying no. Maybe she doesn't really want to come. Where I'm like, oh, could she do something else? So if you're like, thanks so much for inviting me, don't actually use Tupperware. But if you have a candle, clothing, I don't know, something else, I'm there. Then they know, oh, she isn't the person to invite to this type of thing. So it's just like having that honest communication, because me saying I don't like Tupperware isn't a judgment on you liking Tupperware. I love that you love it. Like, let's go. But it doesn't mean that I have to invest in a thing. Because I used to be the person, sure, not only would I go, then I'd buy a bunch of stuff that I had no intention of ever using, just because I didn't want them to think ill of me. And then I had this weird precedent in my head that was unspoken, that when I had something, they would come along and they would buy stuff because I'd always done it for them. And then when they didn't, I would get frustrated. And I was like, ooh, in hindsight, I can see how unhealthy and how that was all in my head. But, because someone else with healthy boundaries would be like, oh, no, thanks. And then I'd be like, I've always come to your thing because I came to their thing to please them, not because I was actually interested in the thing, but they didn't know that.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And, kind of connects back to what you were sharing in the beginning, that the intention behind why you're saying yes to the thing. Like you said, you were doing it more to please them. And I would imagine that setting boundaries would start with understanding yourself more, because you mentioned that knowing that you're an introvert and you need that time to recharge. And I can totally understand that because I'm the same way. And I would imagine, like, would you suggest that people start with understanding just what it is that their needs are first on the journey?
That's such a great thing, because so often people don't understand what their needs are at all. Like when I ask them, what are your goals? What do you like? What do you do this? It's kind of blank. So if that's you, if you're listening to this and you're like, I don't know what my needs are, start with what you don't like. Because often, we might not know what we need or like, but we know what we don't like. So for me, it's like, I didn't like Tupperware parties or any sort of MLM really. I don't like horror movies. I don't like Chinese food. Not that I don't like the food, it just often has MSG, makes you feel unwell. So there's all these list of things that I don't like. So then if someone suggests something that's one of those, I would be like, my commitment to myself is that I'm not going to go. So if someone's like, would you like to come to this Chinese place? Love to go out for dinner. Is there an option for something else, like, Thai, Mexican, whatever else? Or if I don't want to go, like sometimes it could just be, I don't want to go. And that is okay. You can just be like, thanks so much for inviting me. I'm unavailable, or not this week, or whatever. Because, like, I think sometimes we feel like our needs aren't valid, or, if you invite me to anything on Friday, it's going to be no. It doesn't matter what it is. It's a no, because it's the end of the week and I'm tired. So it's kind of like, could there be another time? But like looking at, and also how often can you do things? So for me, I'd like only one, but I can do 2 things on a weekend, but then I'm done. So it's just kind of knowing. And then I like at least one weekend a month where there's nothing on. Like I just don't have to leave my house. So if someone's like, I want to do this thing, let me check my schedule, because it's an honest thing. Like, what else do I have on, so that I know that I need that time to rest and recharge? Or, asking, can you push out the date, or can you do it at a different time? Like, I think just having that conversation and dealing with your guilt or what you think they're going to think about you, that you're weird or you're this. Actually, people usually really appreciate someone with strong boundaries, because as Brené Brown says, clear is kind. So when you're clear, you're actually being kind. When you're unclear, oh, I'm not sure, I've got a headache or whatever, that's actually unkind, because then they're probably making it mean something all about them. So looking at, what is it that you like to do, or if you don't know in the beginning, what is it that you don't like to do? How often do you like to or available to attend things? Like, what is your capacity? And how much do you need up your sleeve, like depending on what else you have on? So like, I have young kids, so sometimes it's like these times I'm not available. Like, this is school pickup or this is school drop off. That's another thing too. Like, if I have a friend reach out, a lot of my friends don't have kids. Like, I need to chat or I need this, I'll be like, well, what times are you available today? I'm not available here, or this isn't the best time. Because if I'm listening to someone on the phone while my kids or whatever, like, neither of them are getting my full attention. So it's kind of looking at when you're available, what you're available for, and realizing, like, if the friendship is that truly one-sided, like you're always the one who's accommodating or instigating or whatever, instead of like going cold turkey or just hoping the other person will pick up the slack, maybe having that difficult conversation. Because sometimes, and I've done this on more than one occasion, where I've kind of breathed into a paper bag and had the thing and saying, this is how I feel, like I statements, not you or whatever. The person has gone, I thought you enjoyed that. Like, I thought you liked, because there are some people who like to do this. And when you say, actually, this is how I feel, then they will meet you because they value the friendship just as much, but they assumed that you loved being the one who arranged everything.
Yeah. Yeah, I think those are some great questions and tips for people to start and looking more at what their needs are and how they can start to set boundaries. And I think you shared a lot of really valuable stories and examples to help people to understand it more, and also tips. Are there any final thoughts that you have for somebody who's struggling with setting boundaries, with people pleasing, saying no?
I still just like the gym example because it's relatable. You're going to build up the muscle for this. And sometimes we can listen to all the podcasts, we can read all the books, we can, procrastinate by preparing. And really the way to do it is to start, is to pick something small and to give it a go, and then evaluate, like, okay, what did I do well? What didn't go so well? What would I do differently next time? Because sometimes we can build this up in our head, and then when we go and do it and have that real world experience, it doesn't go how we hoped. It doesn't mean ditch the plan. It's just like, okay, I need to tweak this slightly. And just to be prepared for people to take it a lot better than you think. Like, you'll have those doom scenarios in your head. But most of the time, because people love and care and value you and want to be in your life. So when you're actually like, this doesn't work for me any longer, or this is how I'm feeling, for them to respond in kind instead of at attack or whatever. And I think one last thing for listeners, if you are really freaking out or it's really feeling activated, just ask yourself, how old am I? Because sometimes it's a younger version of us, like a kid who wasn't picked for the soccer team, or a kid who was shunned from a social group. Like, that part of us is really at the forefront. Whereas adult us has so many more skills and so many more things available to us. And it's like, oh, hello, teenage me. Like, it's like, I see you, but we're not in high school anymore. And not in a sarcastic downplaying way, but of course you feel like this. But now we've learned so much more, and we have such different relationships and much calmer hormones than we had 20, 30 years ago.
Yeah, love that final tip. So such an important reminder. So if people want to connect with you more, how can they do that?
Best place to head is my website. So it's suzanneculberg.com, SuzanneCulberg. I know you're going to put it in the show notes. This whole bunch of resources. I absolutely love my website. I'd highly recommend going to the newsletter tab and signing up for my newsletter. I know some people go the nascent eye roll. Oh, another email. My emails rock. I send them typically once a week. They're typically a story, something that I don't put on socials or something else. I love my email list. And if you want to connect with me, just hit reply to one of those. I will chat to you via email. Boundary setting person will set a boundary. I don't do DMs. So if you DM me on social media, I will encourage you to send me an email, because, a boundary for me is being available 24/7. check my emails typically once a day at my computer. It's not even on my phone. And, I think being able to disconnect from our work is a healthy thing. So that's what I encourage.
Awesome. Yeah. Love that modeling of setting those boundaries. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today. I think you shared some really valuable tips that my listeners will find helpful.
Thank you so much for having me.